Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and today I'm going to share with you what's on my sewing table. And let me tell you, it's a lot. So let's kick it. I don't know that I have a lot to say. Well, yes, I do, but I have a lot to show you. So I have a lot to say about what I'm going to show you, and it's a lot on this video today. And before we get started, I want to acknowledge the happiness and sunshine that is behind me it's not actually on the design wall, it's hanging from a curtain rod, but it's a gingham 9-patch Irish chain. Well, I guess all Irish chains are 9 patches. Anyway, and I made it nearly a year ago. And it was actually much further back in my quilting journey. And the pieces are a little bit larger. Those squares are 3.5-inch unfinished. So the finished block is 9 by 9. And I got the whole top done and was thrilled. All of it is shirts, gingham shirts, and white shirts. And I was mostly happy with it. I love the gingham. I love the brightness of each of the colors, which so far I have not been able to capture in pictures or hopefully on film. We'll get it this time, but it's just so much brighter and happier in person. And I loved it. And I have this really pretty backing for it. And I was going to quilt it myself. And I did. I did diagonal lines, straight line quilting. And then I had this really big goal that I would hand quilt the centers of the white blocks. And that proved a bigger challenge than I was apparently prepared to meet. So it sat and it sat and it sat, and it was on my desk and it just was collecting dust. Paul and I had a heart-to-heart about it because it really is a pretty quilt, but it is very plain and simple and fairly basic. And I just lost the gumption to do the white centers. And so we had a prayer meeting. Not really. We just talked about it. And I reached out to good friends. One's a long arm quilter, and the other is my friend Jennifer, who I reference constantly on this channel. And the four of us decided, what might be best is just to pull the quilting out and give it to someone who can really do something with it. And that's what we did. And so I just got it back this weekend from my friend, the long arm quilter, Sissy, who basically did it out of the kindness of her heart. And she did a beautiful job with it. And we will do a quilt story on it when it's all done. But I wanted to acknowledge that that's what's behind me. Because some of you are going to be like, what is that? Because I haven't shown it. It's a gift for a friend. She knows that I'm making a quilt for her, but she does not know what. And I had to block her on my social media so she wouldn't accidentally see it. So that's a lot about something that's not even on my sewing table, but it is because I have the binding to do, and I'm very excited about that. So with that, moving on. So I have a lot here on my table, and I'm excited about really all of it, but it's a lot. This first little pile right here is the binding strips, or you might even call it a jelly roll. Having a hard time with the words today. Jelly roll that I did as a test for how much binding can you get out of a men's dress shirt out of each size. And what a great experiment that was. I'm still blown away by how many strips of 2.5-inch binding you can get from a shirt. And now I have a table full of binding strips. And we grouped it together. I was like, oh, that looks like a flower. That's so pretty. And it is. And now I have all this cut fabric. And so I'm in the market for a jelly roll friendly quilt. And so I'm going to have to do something. I haven't even started. I could do another Adventureland quilt, which I have done one, and we have a video on that, a quilt story on that. And it was beautiful. but there's something in me that's like, I'm not sure I want to repeat a pattern just yet. I mean, I am really just in the infancy of my quilting journey, despite the age, and baby quilter, not a baby person. And so I want to do something different. I haven't even experienced who has experienced every quilt pattern out there? There are so many patterns I have not even begun to start yet. So I'm in the market for a jelly roll friendly quilt. So going to be thinking about that. We might actually do a video about that. So I'm no doubt I'll narrow it down to 2 or 3 and then have that. I don't know. This one's really pretty. So that will be coming. So that's that. Quick for once, and I'm going to move that off the table so I can make room for more stuff. So I put that away and pulled out something else that's also on my sewing table. For those of you that have been watching, I did quite a few videos on cutting plaids and this Magnolia quilt pattern with plaids and good quilt patterns for plaids. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I watch other people's videos and I see what they've started on, I want to see what it became. And so I made a lot of test blocks. Really, it started out for the channel, but also just for my own curiosity. This one was for the channel. And I wanted to show you what I made out of it. So this is the Magnolia quilt block in purple. I'm going to lay it out so you can see it. So this was the block that I'm trying to remember if I made it or if Jennifer made it. I made this one, I think. I'll look because hers was a little bit bigger because she's better at doing a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. But I added a border and I chose a binding that is not actually exactly in this print, this plaid, but it seemed to go and I really liked it. Quilted it myself. Let's have everyone be proud because it'd been a while since I've done any actual quilting. Well, other than the cup away. But so I just did straight line quilting at, I think it's probably 1.5 inches. And I really like the way it turned out. The back is the same blue as the border. And if you see these dots through, I'm sure you're wondering, I used a fabric for the backing of the pillow front that I bought at a thrift store. And I actually really, really liked this fabric, but then it's kind of tricky because it actually has a green undertone. And so anything I put with it seemed to clash. So I was like, perfect. I'll use it as the backing of the quilted pillow top front. Whew, that's a lot of modifiers. And put it in the back. And so no one will see it. You'll put a, pillow form in here. And I did not do my rule that I made up that turns out everybody knew, which is to do 2/3 of the fabric, 2/3 of the width of the fabric for here and 2/3 of the width of the fabric for here. And then you get 1/3 covered so that when you put a pillow form in it, it doesn't show its guts like this. So I did not do that because I was limited on my fabric, which is part of the deal about using thrifted fabric. So what I'm going to have to do is probably put a button here and a button here and then a little fabric covered loop so that it'll attach. You like that? And it'll keep it from pulling away. So that's that. So that's a finish. And then for contrast, here's the one that Jennifer did. And you can see I actually have my blue chalk markings still on here. This one I quilted differently. I did it on the angles. So I followed the line of the piecing all across. And I really like that too. I don't know if you can see the difference here. So exact same block. Remember, this was the one that was fussy cut perfectly. And you can see this one was straight through those pieces. This one kind of goes around and makes a diamond. So this one I did not put a border on. And if I had to do it again, I might. I love this purple. I just think that is so, so pretty. And I might put a white border on it, but I didn't. And I quilted that on the diagonal This one is still on my sewing table because I have not, you can see I'm 3/4 away around. I'm almost there, almost there. So this one, same exact problem. It's not really a problem. It just requires other changes. I was at the end of this blue Oxford cloth shirt, and I wanted to use it because I thought that it was really, really pretty with that purple and not enough overlap. Same backing there. Ooh. Cool. Oh, and there's a binding clip in there. So anyway, I'll have to do the same thing. I'll do either some kind of buttons or ribbon, not real sure. And these may become a giveaway of some sort because I don't know what I'm going to do with these purple plaid pillow covers. So anyway, that's that. So this one is still in the works. This one is done, and looking forward to finishing that up and marking that off the whips list. And the quilt behind me is another whip that is so close. So I'm excited. All right. So you've noticed, because I've called it out, the Magnolia quilt is not behind me for the first time, I think, in months. It's all right here stacked up. I have a lot of it sewn together. I literally, when we're done with this video, I'm going to swing this back around, put the arm on it, and finish sewing the quilt top together. So that's really exciting. And as I was taking this off the design wall and putting it here on my table, I had a realization / baby epiphany. The blocks that I like the best are the ones that were made with shirts, even the solids. And I realized it because this turquoise linen, which, I mean, come on, turquoise linen, you gotta love it. But it's so pretty, but it's interesting. It's a beautiful color, but it's got the texture of the linen, and it's not, you may not be able to see this on the video, but every piece is not exactly the same color because it was worn, the shirt. And there were places where the color was not true. And it's close, but not exact. And that makes it interesting. As I was laying it out, what made me realize this, so this piece I've already sewn together. So there's this green, this is the chartreuse green linen that I was like, I don't know how I'll use this, but it's linen. And then this navy with the white polka dot. And I was just kind of admiring the fabric, and I laid it down on top of this green. And right here is another solid. Neither of these are shirts. This was came from a fabric bundle that Paul got me for my birthday, and it's AGF solids, AGF. Art Gallery Fabrics solids, and he bought me a big stack of the rainbow, and I have loved them because they're so beautiful, especially stacked up together. And so I used them in this project because these were the colors that are in that plaid that was kind of the inspiration. And it is a pretty block, but it's not as interesting to me as this block, and maybe I just like this color better. But I do love this kind of seafoam blue, but it is not as interesting. And I think it's because the fabric is honestly so pristine. It's a quilting cotton, and every fiber in this fabric is exactly the same. Whereas in this one, also a solid, and again, linen, so throw me a bone, there's just some variance there, and it's so much prettier. And I thought, maybe it's just because I like turquoise. And I was just kind of thumbing through. And of course, oh my, that plaid just continues to inspire. There's the yellow, that's that AGF solid. Also, pretty, but not as interesting. And then I get to that navy, which is a shirt, and I'm like, oh. And then I get to the gingham, and I'm like, oh, and then I get to, well, there's that linen again, that chartreuse, and then there's a yellow gingham. The shirts are just more interesting. So maybe, I was already a convert. Maybe I've just totally come all the way, full circle. So the quilt top is almost done. You can see some of this is sewn together. And I just have probably 10 seams, and I'll be done, which is exciting. which means that now I have to consider the backing, which of course I've been considering the whole time I'm working on it. I want to point out that I don't love patterns that have a lot of waste. But it's somewhat unavoidable. And this is one of them. These are done with snowball corners. So it's a flip and trim scenario. So, it starts off as a square, you sew it down and then fold it, trim it and fold it back. And what that creates is this right here. And I have not done a quilt pattern that had this many scraps that of exactly the same size. And so I've just been thinking about it. And each block has 24 pairs of triangles that come from it. And there are 16 blocks in the quilt pattern. Well, I did it as a 16. You could do it more. So that's a lot of little bitty triangles. Before I started this quilt pattern, I probably would have just tossed these or made a little project out of them if I had really had the time and space and energy. But I just started putting them in a baggie and I just saved them because they were honestly, I felt like they were too pretty to throw away. And I didn't want to put them in my scrap bin because it seemed like it was such a good colorway. So I saved them. Moral of the story. That was a long way to say I saved them. And I've come up with a plan and I'm excited about it. So let me move this and then I'm going to tell you about the back. When I first started, people would say, oh, I have 10 quilt tops that still need backing and need to be quilted. In my inexperience and naivete and perhaps arrogance, judgmental, I thought to myself, I can remember thinking to myself, you have 10 quilt tops? Why do you have 10 quilt tops? My goodness, that's 10 quilts. Like, let's get them done. I couldn't conceive why you would have a quilt top done and not go on and get it finished. And the longer I quilt, the more I understand this because there are those of us that really, really like piecing and we really like considering a quilt pattern and picking the fabrics and it might be for me, that might be picking out of my shirts, but for some people that's picking fabrics at the local quilt store. And that's one of the things that gives me life and happiness and joy. And I forget that the quilt top is merely one of the steps in the full quilt making process. And I think we do tend to like I'm almost finished with my quilt. Well, no, actually, I'm almost finished with my quilt top. And backing it's a whole thing. Finding a backing fabric that goes with the front or that is a nice contrast. Fabric is expensive, and the amount of fabric that you need to cover the entire back of your quilt is a lot. And so it adds up quick. And it can be a daunting process because you generally have to seam your backing fabric together. And figuring out how to do that with the size quilt that you have is a little bit of a hurdle, maybe a big hurdle for some people, which let me do a plug right here. Kitchen Table Quilting, I'm a fan. If you know this, if you have been on this channel, she has some wonderful resources on her blog. And she actually has a how to calculate your backing fabric and then how to cut it and how to seam it with diagrams. So it's amazing. So if you're a person who buys yardage to do your backing, check that out. So plug over back to the discussion. I like a pieced backing, but you have to think it through. And moral of the story, I can see how people end up with a whole bunch of quilt tops and not completed quilts. So this particular one, though, I stumbled on a set of gray sheets, top and fitted. And this is the fabric. And it's really a nice gray. I don't know what a not nice gray would be. Gray with attitude. It's not totally gray. It can look a little pink in certain lights. It can look a little tan in certain lights, which for me in this process is really good because it's very neutral. I like the idea of having a neutral background, especially if you have a really pretty front. But then there's like, oh, it's kind of uninteresting though. So you can see where I'm going with this because these are still sitting here and I kind of dropped the nugget of I'm going to use this in some way. And then now I have this expanse of gray fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little triangles. I'm going to cut squares or rectangles of some undetermined size. I had thought I would do like a fat quarter, but I think it's going to be too big for the proportions of the triangles. But I also think that could be really cool. So I haven't totally settled on it. Imagine this is the size, the cut piece that I'm going to use. I'm going to do these two little triangles in opposing corners. Stitch that down, do a little flip and trim. So stitch here, trim, which this is going to make so many gray triangles that I'm going to have to come up with something to do with the gray triangles. Anyway, and fold that back. And then this is one block. And then I'm going to just repeat that. So then the next block, and I'll do the triangles on the same two corners. So it won't come together as a square, it won't come together as a bow tie. It'll just be this little tip of color and interest. And I actually think it's going to be really, really cool because the block itself uses those flip and trim snowball corners. And in the block, it actually does this on just those two opposing sides in some of the pieces. And I thought it would be kind of a nice nod, like an artistic nod to what's on the front and tied into the back while not really having to do a ton of work to do it. Now I'll have to piece all the blocks together. So the proportions may be a little bit wrong for how small these triangles are, but I think it could actually be really cool. So that's my idea. And I haven't decided clearly. I may do like a color on one corner and a white on one corner and do that throughout the whole quilt back, or I may just do a whole motley assortment. I got this idea from two places actually, and I want to be sure and credit them. I referenced that Sunday Morning Quilts book near constantly on this channel, but she has a quilt pattern that is it's a book about using your scraps, and the quilt pattern is really this. It's not this big block, but it's using these. And then she has a second book, and I'm saying Amanda Jean Nyberg is the author. She is a huge scrap advocate. There's a second book that's called No Scrap Left Behind. And so in Sunday Morning Quilts, there's this, and she says it on point. And so the triangles are like this. And then in the No Scrap Left Behind, she does another similar pattern where they're on this orientation. And there's another book that one of my viewers recommended, and it's called Utility Quilts. That's not actually the name of it. We're going to have to look it up. Paul will put the real name of it and the author because it's a really, really good book. She did 8-inch squares with a colored like red on one corner and white on the other, and all of the blocks were varying blues. And she didn't quilt it densely. She actually, I think, stitched in the ditch, and it made this puffy square. And it's very simple and very beautiful. So that's where I got the idea from, those three places. And I just think it's going to be really interesting. So I might do the block that's the size of the block on the front. If I do that, I will probably have to quilt it myself, because if I send it to a long armor and say, I want these blocks to match front and back, they'll look at me like I'm crazy. And I wouldn't do that to my worst enemy, much less people that I like. So here's my little box of triangles with my background fabric. That's going to go on the back of the Magnolia quilt, and I think it's going to be lovely. If you've been with me for a while, you may have seen my wedding project quilt video. And in it, I talk about how I want to make this quilt for a friend who had a wedding last year. I don't know why I said had a wedding, got married last year. And I have been collecting, gathering linen, and I have this desire to make a linen quilt. And then also, I want to make a quilt that would be lovely for my friend Amy. And I was back and forth between a couple of different quilt patterns and have decided that the one that I really was kind of biased toward is just not going to work. I'm back to the drawing board, and this is the drawing board. So if you follow me on Instagram, you have seen this block. I made it last week, kind of like, let me just see if this will work. And it's pretty, I think. If I wish you could see it. This is when I wish there was a touch button on YouTube, or you could get it really close and do the like, oh my goodness. So here's the idea. The idea is that I make an orange peel quilt that's two-tone with which I mean, I'm stating the obvious. This is like super Captain Obvious, but the background is the beige linen, and the petals, or I don't know. Somebody said this is the crust and this is the pie. So the pie is white and the crust is crust colored. um, and I make a whole quilt out of this. Now, ironically, Missouri Star Quilt Company just did a whole thing about orange peel quilts. And I had no idea, actually. And that's so cool. So that means the muses are out there working their magic and people are being drawn toward orange peel quilts. This one is not applique. So the one that Missouri Star Quilt Company has done is an applique where you have the piece and you fold it under and then you stitch it down. This is actually curve sewn. So lots of things to say about this, but the start is I think this would have such a beautiful visual impact, just the two-tone. And then it's like the angel on my shoulder and the devil on my shoulder. It's like, that would be so pretty. Yes, but it might be really plain. Right, but plain is really pretty and timeless. But what about some interest? So I had this idea that I could do this orange peel quilt and have the pie part, the petals, just intermittently, definitely not random, but dispersed throughout the quilt top, one of the colors from the bridesmaids' dresses or colors of her wedding. So I drew it out with my colored pencils, which, by the way, if you're new to the channel and you've seen the colored pencils and you think, is that just for decoration? It is not. I use them, I wouldn't say all the time, but enough. So anyway, and they are also pretty and happy. So here is the mock-up, and you can see how that would come together. And if you can imagine the colors taken away, it would really be pretty as a two-tone quilt. But the pieces, the blocks are not very large. And so there will have to be a lot of them for it to be a nice size quilt. Maybe as many as 9 by 10, so 90 blocks in order to really have a decent size quilt. And that's a lot of repetition. And so I thought, well, what if I did the intermittently dispersed? And I think it would make it fresh and modern. And so I drew that and I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And in the meantime, I have been working out, good, better, best way of doing these pieces. And let me stop right there for a second and say, some of you will wonder, do I have a template? Do I have a ruler? Do I have I almost said plexiglass. And it wouldn't be plexiglass anyway. It's plastic. What? Whatever those rulers are made out of. I don't have those rulers actually. But I did buy the pattern for the cutaway quilt, and that's the one that looks like tulips kind of, but it's actually a Chilean flower called cutaway. And the pattern was designed by Fran from Cotton and Joy. And we'll put a link to that in the description if you're interested. And in that quilt pattern, she provided a template that you print out and instructions on how to sew curves. My goodness. Thank you, Fran. That has been fantastic. So to start with, I already had the template. And actually, let me stop. I want to show you that. So these are the templates for this section. You can see all the little marks I've made, and I use a graphite pencil, and this is where my pencil goes all the way. So all those little marks, and I cut this one on purpose, and we'll have to talk about that later because we're running out of time. But anyway, so you cut these pieces from here, and then the white pieces from here, and sew them together, and started on it. And then I realized that where the joins are going to be is really thick. And I watched a video from Tiny Orchard Quilts on the recommendation of a friend that the better way to do it is to press your seams open when you do it, so that way you don't have all that bulk at one corner. And so I'm just like learning, which is my favorite. So put the block together, loved it, figuring out, you can see I didn't press all my seams to open on the first go around. And so I'm learning, and I thought it turned out really pretty. And then I did this drawing and realized, okay, that could be really, really cool. And then this morning I was in the shower and I thought, I don't have to do the colors in the petal. I could do the colors as the background. And so I want to show you what that looks like. And there it is. And I'm not going to lie, I like it better, I think. It's just a different look. And you can see how both would be really interesting. Part of it, I didn't like this teal, which is part of the discussion about this. And I didn't like where I put them together. And this feels more like, almost like stars interspersed throughout. And you can imagine on a big scale, that would be really, really cool. This is more like petal leaves. So still in debate there about that. So unfortunately, I have so many of these to make. I do want to get out there and say, in talking about this quilt, one of the things I said about the quilt that I was considering before was that I don't like waste, and especially with shirts. And I am such a hypocrite. My the contradictory nature knows no bounds, because when you cut these pieces out of a big stretch of fabric, you end up with a bunch of these oval petals. And so there is actually a fair amount of waste. And so now I feel like maybe I should go back and say, and I don't like waste, but I think maybe I just didn't want to do half square triangles, and I should just, I should just own that. I just don't want to do half square. I don't want to have a box of triangles when I'm done with this project. If you are this person also, and you say things like, I don't want to do because of the waste or because of the whatever, and then you do a totally different quilt pattern that does it's okay. We're in this together. You can just own it and be like, I just didn't really want to do half square triangles. One of my viewers actually said, I love this and I think this is such a beautiful pattern, but I can't stand snowballs. And I think that's so great. Just own it. Just own it. I don't want to do snowballs. And so at this point, for whatever reason, I don't want to do half square triangles. And so let's own it and move on. Instead, I'm going to do curves. It's going to do so much more waste and take so much longer. But, whatever. It's wherever the muse goes. So when I did this first one and I used kind of the colors of the bridesmaids dresses, I wasn't sure I really liked it. And so we went back to the drawing table, the colorist, my youngest daughter and we settled on, for sure, these three. And they are so, so, so pretty with that tan. And then I kept pushing for this. I don't know why. We found this, which I don't just adore. It's a little vibrant for it. And my youngest said that this is too big of a jump. It needs something in the middle. So I put this in the middle, which works from a color standpoint, but she nearly vibrated out of her seat because she can't stand the print. She can't stand the fact that it's a plaid. and the others are solid. So now I have to find a shirt in that exact color that's not a plaid. And I really need to find another green that's close to this, but not as vibrant, but we won't go there. And then we threw around the idea of doing the blues, and we came up with this. This is linen. This is another shirt from the very beginning. And then this is a navy shirt. So, which I did reflect that in this part of the drawing. So it may be this, it may be just this, which I think is actually, gosh, so pretty. Or it might be like more floral and just no blues. I haven't decided. And so now I have even more thoughts to plague my brain, which this is the kind of plague that I love. I'd rather be excited and thinking constantly about whether I want to use greens or this green or that green in this pattern than to be worried about the fact that I still haven't replaced my car from the car accident that I had a month ago. So quilting is therapy, right? So quilting is therapy. That's where I am with this. I'm calling it the orange peel quilt for now. And I have a lot of sewing to do. I have discovered that this particular pattern is so good, especially if you press the seams open, because then you trim this down. So you sew it and they kind of look a little wonky at first because of the stretch, and then you trim it back to that 5-inch, and then it just sews together really beautifully. So I'm super excited about that. I know I've got a lot of these to make, and so I don't have to actually figure out these colors just yet because I have so many more that will be this. And so I will be doing that from now until the cows come home. But but I'm actually really looking forward to it. I'm already better at it, even just doing these that you see in front of you. And if anyone's interested, leave a comment about if you haven't done curves before and you're interested in some of the more specifics of the lessons that I've learned while doing curved seams. Maybe we can do about a video on that in the future. So I've got a lot on my sewing table. What else is new? And I think that this one is going to actually be really pretty and have a big impact. So we'll see. I guess that's it. I hope you're having a really great spring. It's been weird, the weather this year, and I feel like here we are in May, and it's just now starting to be warm enough to enjoy it. But I hope things are good in your world. I hope you're having great things on your sewing table, and I appreciate you being with me today. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thanks so much for watching.